Hi children, I am going to start a new lesson, that is social movements in our times. The title of the lesson is Social Movements in Our Times. In this lesson, we are going to learn about the basic features of the social movements, by whom they are led and why they are led, and also the different movements which were led in different countries for different purposes. We are going to learn in this lesson. Now let us see the background of these social movements first. As you know, by the end of Second World War, the colonial rule came to an end. That means all the colonies got independence, like India, China, Indonesia, Nigeria, all these countries which were colonized by the European powers, they got independence. And when they got independence, it was their first and foremost target to increase their economic situation. Economic growth and economic development was their goal. For all these countries which got independence newly from colonial rule, they concentrated on economic growth and economic development of the country. But at the same time, many sections of the societies which were discriminated, which were not denied equal rights and equal justice along with the others, they started movements to assert their rights, to demand their rights. They started movements. On one side, these countries, newly independent countries, they were trying to achieve economic growth and economic development. At the same time, some sections of the societies which were denied equal rights and justice, they came out demanding equal rights and equal justice through movements. Now let us see what are these movements. And one of the most important such movements was American Civil Rights Movement. It was led in 1960s, and there was a lot of discrimination being shown towards the black Americans. This movement fought for equal treatment of Afro-Americans. That means blacks and whites should be equally treated. Equal justice should be given to them. Equal rights should be given to them. To end this discrimination, civil rights movement was started in USA. And to the extent that even the buses and the saloons, the schools, public parks and housing areas, all these were separate for whites and blacks in USA. So this movement reached its height during the 1960s, and even in the buses also they were segregated. Whites and blacks were segregated. And it was largely non-violent and took the form of a massive demonstrations and marches. On non-violent basis, this movement was started. No violence took place. Mostly marches were held, demonstrations were held. Civil disobedience. Civil disobedience means violating discriminatory laws peacefully. And they also started boycotting the discriminatory services. Suppose in the buses, whites and blacks were discriminated. Immediately, the blacks, what they did, they boycotted the bus services for entirely 1 year. And it was a great loss to the bus company. When all the blacks, they boycotted bus services for full 1 year, it was a great loss to the bus company. And immediately, the court banned this segregation in buses in 1956 because it was a great loss to the bus company. And maybe the bus company requested or appealed to the court, and the court banned it in 1956. Segregation in buses was ended in 1956. And at the same time, there was a powerful movement going on to put an end to all the other discriminations also. There were separate schools, separate housing areas, I told you, separate parks. Everything was separate for blacks and whites. To end this discrimination, a powerful movement was going on. And on 28 August 1963, more than 2 lakh people, they marched towards Washington, demanding to pass the Civil Rights Act. If the Civil Rights Act is passed, they cannot discriminate the people on the basis of their color. So they demanded that the Civil Rights Act should be passed immediately, and they also demanded that employment should be generated, full and fair employment, not on the basis of discrimination. All the people should be treated equally in providing employment opportunities and decent housing and right to vote, and schools should be started where education can be given to both blacks and whites. Both blacks and whites can get education in the same school. such schools should be established. This was the demand of this movement, and this was called as Washington March. It is famously known as Washington March. It was led on 28th August 1963. And this movement, civil rights movement, was mostly led by Martin Luther King Jr. And it was on this occasion that he gave his famous speech, I Have a Dream. You have this lesson in English in 8th class also. And he addressed the people, I have a dream. What was his dream? He had a dream that his 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will be judged by not by the color of the skin, but by their character, but the content of their character. He was dreaming of such a world that his children will be judged one day not on the basis of their color of the skin, but by the content of their character. This was his dream. And this civil rights movement was led by Martin Luther King Jr. And as the movement was growing stronger, many people agreed with Martin Luther King that it was possible to achieve equality for all the people, blacks and whites, through peaceful means, because it was only non-violent basis it was started, by insisting the government to pass necessary laws. If we insist the government to pass the necessary laws, it is enough, and we can get equality for all the blacks and whites also on a non-violent basis. Peacefully we can get equality of both blacks and whites. But some others, like Malcolm X, they were of the opinion that blacks belong to a separate nation and they should fight for their independence from white rule, which may include armed clashes. Even if needed, they have to use weapons also, and they have to fight for their independence. And the women who took an active part in this Washington March, they were not allowed to speak. Now let us see another movement which was led in USSR, human rights movements in USSR, and why they were led. As you know, USSR, full form of USSR is Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It was formed in 1924 by combining some of the Eastern European countries like Poland, Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. These countries were combined together, and Russia. Together they formed USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And these countries came under the rule of USSR. When they joined USSR, they also followed communism, because USSR was a communist country. So these countries also followed communism. That means they also had to establish communist government in their countries. Now let us see how these countries faced problems under USSR. USSR did not allow multi-party system in these countries, and freedom of press was not allowed, freedom of expression was not allowed, and even freedom of movement for ordinary people was also not allowed in these countries which came under the control of USSR. And these countries were constantly facing these problems. And even the people were tired of these controls and they wanted to get separated from USSR. Countries like Hungary, Czechoslovakia and Poland, they wanted to get separated from USSR's control also. And some of the movements which were led by these countries to get freedom from USSR or to get control over these restrictions imposed by USSR, these were supported by USA and UK, because these USA and UK, they were anti-communist countries. They were against USSR. So they supported the movements led by these countries to get separated from USSR. And these movements for human rights, they were mostly led by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the famous writer. He was a famous writer. And Andrei Sakharov, he was a nuclear scientist. These two leaders, they led these movements. And by whom they were supported, these movements? By USA and UK. Why they were supported by them? Because they were anti-communist countries. Now, when President Gorbachev became the president of USSR, immediately seeing to the situation, he introduced some reforms. And these reforms were called Glasnost and Perestroika. Glasnost and Perestroika. And through these reforms, he brought greater freedom for the people who joined USSR. he gave greater freedom to these countries. Now, anti-nuclear and anti-war movements. As we know, during the Second World War in 1945, on August 6th and August 9th, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, two cities of Japan, they were bombed by USA with the help of USSR. And with this incident only, completely these two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were completely devastated due to bombing. And then Japan surrendered to the Allied powers and the Second World War came to an end with this incident only. And these cities, they were devastated in such a way that they almost became deserts. Even today, many problems they are facing. And despite these devastations, countries, some superpowers like USA, USSR, Britain, France, they started increasing their nuclear weapons. Though they saw this devastation caused due to this bombing, these superpowers, they started increasing their nuclear weapons after the Second World War also. And there was a threat of Third World War taking place in the world. And if a Third World War takes place, they increase their nuclear weapons in such a way that the complete world will be destroyed. The entire world was at a constant threat of Third World War. So, many of the environmentalists, the social activists, and even the scientists, they insisted that this arms race must be put to an end. And mostly, the main competitors in this arms race were USA and USSR. So, all these environmentalists, scientists, they insisted that USA and USSR should put an end to their arms race. Now, USA vs Vietnam. Already we learnt about this war between USA and Vietnam in our 15th lesson in National Liberation Movements. How USA attacked Vietnam and destroyed the fields by using Agent Orange, B-52 and napalm bombs and killing 8 to 30 lakh military and civilians in Vietnam. Just to stop the unification of North and South Vietnam, it was done by USA. And thereby to stop the spread of communism in the world countries. That was the main aim of USA. For that, an innocent country, Vietnam, was attacked by USA. And the Vietnamese, they used guerrilla warfare methods in this war to fight with USA. And it was seriously criticized all over the world. And even in America, parents of the soldiers felt that the Vietnamese did not cause any harm to Americans. Then why should they fight war and kill such innocent people? So they called back their children home. Most of the soldiers, they were called back by their parents. And even the soldiers also felt that why to cause harm to these innocent people when they did not harm us. So they returned back. And as a result of this, USA was forced to leave Vietnam and go back. And thus the war between USA and Vietnam came to an end. Now, arms race between USA and USSR was seriously condemned by the scientists, environmentalists, and social activists. And they brought pressure to end this arms race. And as a result of this pressure, USA and USSR, who were the main competitors in the arms race, they began talks to reduce their nuclear weapons. And these talks were called as Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, SALT. Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. But these talks, they proved a failure. They were not successful. And finally, a treaty was signed between USA and USSR in 1991, which is called as START. START full form is Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. And this START treaty, it was the largest arms control treaty in the world. START, it was the largest arms control treaty in the history of the world. Though it was signed in 1991, it was implemented in 2001. And as soon as it was implemented, 80% of the nuclear weapons which were existing at that time, they were banned. So this is the largest arms control treaty in the history of the world. And within a few days, a few months of this treaty, the USSR was disintegrated. That means it broke up. Russia became a separate state, and all the other European countries also, they became separate independent state. That means USSR got disintegrated. When USSR broke up, the Cold War also came to an end, because the Cold War was between USSR and USA. When USSR broke up and it formed into separate states, the Cold War also came to an end. So, of course, there were many other wars which were fought in Eastern Europe, Iraq and Afghanistan countries, but the Cold War came to an end as a result of this treaty. Now, Greenpeace movement, another most important. To add to this SALT and START treaty, during the last phase of USSR, a major accident took place in its nuclear plant in Chernobyl. In Chernobyl, there was a nuclear plant in Russia, and there was a major accident in this nuclear plant. And this accident resulted in the death of many workers. And this accident created a new awareness among the people of the world about the dangers of nuclear power. And the next one is Greenpeace movement in Europe. Now let us see what is this Greenpeace movement. This movement initially was started as a protest against the underwater nuclear tests by America near Alaska. Near Alaska, America was conducting some underwater nuclear tests. And it is a risk to the environment. It will lead to environmental pollution. So it was protested. Greenpeace movement initially was started as a protest in 1971 against the underwater nuclear tests carried out by America near Alaska. And some volunteers, they set out in a small ship to the test area to protest against this nuclear test. And this ship was named as Greenpeace, so the movement got its name as Greenpeace movement. And today, this Greenpeace movement is spread over 40 countries with its headquarters in Amsterdam. The headquarters of Greenpeace movement are in Amsterdam, which is in Holland or Netherlands. And it has become an important international non-governmental organization, NGO. Now, during the last few decades, scientists discovered that pollution causes the depletion of ozone layer, which is very important to absorb harmful rays of the sun. And due to pollution, global warming increases, which leads to melting of ice caps and glaciers, which in turn leads to the increase in seas and ocean levels. And finally, resulting in the submergence of the coastal areas. And global warming also causes erratic rainfall. That means sometimes very less rainfall, sometimes heavy rainfall, sometimes no rainfall at all. So, not only the coastal areas but the interior parts also will be affected due to this increasing global warming. And global warming and climate change affects the countries whose population particularly depends on agriculture, like in India. In India, most of the people depend on agriculture, so such countries are mostly affected due to the global warming and climate change. Now, Greenpeace movement has taken up the issue of climate change across many countries, and its main aim is to make sure that the earth is able to nurture life in its all diversities. And it is encouraging the idea of sustainable development. What is sustainable development? Already we learnt in 12th lesson. A development which is useful for the present generation and also the future generations. Now, next one movement is Bhopal gas disaster related movements. Now let us see what is this. Bhopal gas tragedy occurred in Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh in 1984. In 1984, a poisonous gas leaked out of the Union Carbide factory. In Bhopal it was located, and from this Union Carbide factory, poisonous gas leaked out. And thousands of people lost their lives. Most of them, they became blind. Thousands of people lost their lives. Many more are still suffering. They are still in the hospitals under treatment. They are not being given proper treatment also. And this was perhaps the worst industrial disaster in the world. This Bhopal gas tragedy is termed as the worst industrial disaster in the world. And the victims of this Bhopal gas tragedy they were making 4 demands from the beginning. What are those 4 demands? Let us see. Proper medical treatment of the victims. Victims should be given proper medical treatment because still they are in the hospitals. And adequate compensation for them based on international standard, because this Union Carbide factory, it was later on purchased by Dow Company. Dow Company is an American company. So it is an international company, multinational company. So on international standards, the people who are at loss must be given compensation. And fixing criminal responsibility for the disaster on the management of the MNC. That means criminal responsibility must be fixed for this disaster on the MNC, which is the cause for this disaster. And finally, steps should be taken to prevent such disasters in future. These were the 4 demands made by the victims of Bhopal gas tragedy. I am repeating once again these 4. Adequate, first proper medical treatment for the victims, and then adequate means enough compensation for the victims based on international standards, because the company was an international company, multinational company. So the compensation also should be paid on international standards. And fixing criminal responsibility for this disaster on the management of the MNC. And finally, steps to prevent such disasters in future. That is very, very, very important. But these were not fulfilled. These demands were not fulfilled. Bhopal victims are still suffering from its effects, and compensation has been paid by the company but not as per international standards. And also, all the affected people were not paid compensation. And many people across the world boycotted the products made by the Dow Company. And when this Dow Company sponsored Olympics in London, people across the world filed petition against it, because they did not like Dow Company sponsoring Olympics in London. So they filed a petition also against the Dow Company. Now, movements against dams on Narmada River. As part of India's planned developments, 5-year plans. 5-year plans were started in India from 1951 onwards. Already we have discussed it in previous lessons. In the first 5-year plan, priority was given to agriculture, and the measures needed for the development of agriculture were taken up. What are the measures needed for agricultural development? For example, many multi-purpose projects were constructed to provide irrigation to large areas and also to generate power. That was the main aim, to irrigate large areas and also to generate power, which will be useful both in agricultural sector and also industrial sector. And this power was useful for both agricultural and industrial sectors. Bhakra-Nangal project, Hirakud on Mahanadi. Bhakra-Nangal project was constructed on Sutlej River, Hirakud on Mahanadi in Orissa, Nagarjuna Sagar project on Krishna River in Andhra Pradesh. These are some examples of multi-purpose projects. And in the beginning, the people were also wonderstruck by these dams and projects. Why they were wonderstruck? Vast areas could be irrigated, because before these dams were constructed, they used to irrigate their fields by using motor bavi. Only 1 or 2 acres of land could be irrigated with those motor bavis. So, with these projects, when they saw that vast areas could be irrigated and huge amount of water these dams could store, and amount of energy or power that they could generate. By seeing to these, the people were wonderstruck. And also these dams could control floods. That means they could prevent floods and droughts. And seeing to so many advantages of these multi-purpose projects, no one bothered about the people who were dislocated due to the construction of the dams, or trees that were cut down due to the construction of dams, fields that were submerged by these dams. No one bothered about these things, because they were only looking at the different advantages, many advantages which we get from these multi-purpose projects. Irrigating vast areas, and also industrial development, and also generating power, which was useful in both the agriculture and the industrial sectors. So seeing to these advantages, no one bothered about the people who were dislocated due to the construction of dams, what happened to them, and whether they were rehabilitated by the government or not, no one bothered. Trees that were cut down, no one was bothered about it. Fields, many fields were, thousands of acres of fields, fertile lands, they were submerged by these dams. And thousands of acres of fertile land, fields, trees, animals and people who were displaced, all these were completely ignored, seeing to the advantages of the multi-purpose projects. Thousands of people were forced to leave the place and go elsewhere to settle. And some were paid compensation and some did not receive that compensation also. And many people took it positively. And though they were displaced, they took it positively because there were many advantages of these dams. These dams are going to provide many benefits to all the people, so they took it positively. And these dams require huge investments for construction. And if we see to the losses that occur to the people, forest wealth, fields, etc., we can say that the huge investments made in the construction of these dams did not yield adequate results. When we compare the investment with the result, both must be equal or the result must be more. But it was not like that in the construction of dams. The money which was, huge money which was invested in the construction of these dams, seeing to that money, we can say that these dams did not yield adequate results. And these dams could never irrigate vast lands as per the estimation. Before construction of dam, what was estimated by the experts, that much area was not irrigated by these dams after the construction. And also power, as much was expected to be generated from these projects, was not generated. And that is the problem of these dams. Now, when the government proposed to construct a series of projects, dams in Narmada River Valley, already we learnt about it, Narmada Bachao Andolan was started. The people who were displaced, they demanded a fair compensation from the government so that they can resettle somewhere else. They demanded compensation not only for those who owned land and lost their lands now, but also for all the people who lived there. They also demanded proper rehabilitation with land in return for land. And they also demanded for afforestation to compensate for the loss of forest wealth. But soon the people realized that there was no adequate land to compensate and land cannot be created now. They also realized, though late, that in the name of the development, the government is taking all these steps at the cost of tribal communities. And a development which is not sustainable, which did not help the poor and small farmers or workers and tribals in any way. For such type of development, they were starting these construction of projects at the cost of the tribal communities. And now the leaders were decided to oppose the very construction of such dams itself. And Narmada Bachao Andolan was started opposing the construction of dams in Narmada Valley. And we also saw how Baba Mahalia, a resident of Jalasindhi village, he wrote a letter to the then Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh. I asked you to read that letter also. I hope you have read it. Now I conclude it here and we will continue in the next class.